All right. Hi, my name is Hannah Acevedo. I am an educational psychologist. I'm also a board member and a volunteer, and I'm thrilled to be getting to do a presentation on teaching social boundaries to tweens and teens. And one of the reasons I'm really excited to do this is because in my work as a support group leader and in answering the AXYS helpline, this is a topic that comes up a lot. And I know that it's really an area of need for a lot of families and individuals with X and Y chromosome variations. So our objectives today are pretty simple. We're going to just talk about just common difficulties with social boundaries at different ages and why those happen and what their impact can be. And we'll talk about some strategies for helping make these social boundaries more clear and concrete. So let's just start with defining what is a social boundary, because it's kind of a technical word. So in general, we think of social boundaries as unwritten rules that basically suggest ways of behaving that in a certain society are considered appropriate or expected, or inappropriate or not expected. And in general, these are just acquired as kids grow up and parents talk and people pick up on them. But there are a subset of individuals where understanding social boundaries is really tricky and it's pretty complex. Something about social boundaries is there's no book that like writes them down or explains what they are. And so sometimes it can be really hard to understand what is acceptable or unacceptable. And, you know, in general, this type of understanding is really important for starting and maintaining friendships, for developing romantic relationships, and later for obtaining and sustaining employment. So it's a pretty important area. Also, when you're able to do those things, you're at less risk for depression and anxiety. So I like to think about any behavior, especially unexpected social behavior, as kind of being this tip of the iceberg. And we can see that, you know, at the top of this iceberg, we see unexpected social behavior. So something that might not quite fit what our society or culture says is something that an individual should be engaging in. And where this usually comes from is a desire for friendships or a desire for a romantic partner, which is something that really all teens and adults, you know, may have at some point. So typically developing teens and adults may have this, you know, desire, and individuals with X and Y chromosome variations may have this desire. And what complicates it sometimes are these underlying difficulties, reading nonverbal cues, or understanding gray areas, struggles with social skills, or poor body awareness, or strong interest in one area. And so that can lead to some difficulties. So one thing that I often will hear from individuals who are struggling with social boundaries is just this feeling of confusion. Like, I don't understand why I can't say that, or I don't understand why I'm having a hard time making friends. And there's also sometimes a decreased ability to maintain these friendships or get the jobs or establish romantic relationships. There's also potential for having disciplinary consequences at school, or trouble with the law, or of possible abuse. It can be really stressful to the family, and it also can lead to, you know, more need for supervision and less independence as an adult. So something that can be important to consider is that this doesn't come out of nowhere. Often there are behaviors when a child is younger that we just think about as being annoying or different. Like an example would be like getting into people's personal space, or touching people's hair, or blurting out the first thing that comes to mind when you meet someone. So With younger kids, we're like, this is different. But as individuals get to be teenagers and adults, they can, the individual's bigger, and it might present as, off-putting to other people, or dangerous, or as harassment. So we really want to address these as early as possible. At this point, if you're coming into this session with a specific area that you're looking for, that you're concerned about, do feel free to share in the chat if you'd like to. So I'm going to skip over this. So some big ideas are just to think about when we're noticing that there's these difficulties that might be due to difficulty understanding social boundaries. What we really want to focus on is explicitly teaching or helping the individual learn skills and concepts that are going to help them get what they're hoping for, which is a safe friendship, a dating experience, or a vocational experience. And the other thing to just think about is that you're not on your own, and you shouldn't be on your own in helping the individual develop these skills. It's really important that schools and families and outside providers work together in supporting these skill areas. So I'm going to talk for just a minute about 3 different areas of need that we want to work on developing, and then we'll talk about some strategies that you can use starting now. So the first area of need is just focuses around developing basic friendship and dating readiness skills. So there's the desire, but sometimes there's a disconnect between the desire for friendship or social connection and just the basic understanding of how that works. So, some areas that a lot of programs focus on teaching would be just making sure that it's clear what the purpose of friendships and dating are. So sometimes there can be just confusion around even this basic concept. For example, with teenagers, we want to make sure that the teenager understands that dating really involves 2 people. It's a shared experience. And, it really needs to involve someone you like, but also the person needs to like you back. Another kind of area that can be difficult to understand would just be the difference between acquaintances, friendships, and dating relationships. And that there's different expected behaviors in the different relationships. So things that you're going to tell someone you're dating, or the physical space that you have when you're dating, is very different than with someone that you don't know as well. Also, we sometimes need to just help the individual understand that the dating process or the friendship process evolves over time. So sometimes, things will start as a friendship, and you'll learn more about the person and see if you have shared interests before moving on to thinking about dating. Just other skills like grooming habits, getting from point A to point B independently, like, navigating public transportation, having the confidence to ask someone out, are all things that sometimes need more support and explicit teaching in. And also, just many individuals struggle with sensory sensitivities or anxiety and mood issues. And so it's important to explicitly talk about those and have a plan for how we're going to handle those. So the other area is safety skills. So this is something that is really important, and I think really concerning to a lot of parents, particularly with the internet and just how easy it is to kind of get exposed to a lot of things. So, we talked a little bit about these different people, but how does it work in online communities, right? So it's really easy to have a lot of contact with strangers. either through, chat forums or through video games. And so it can be really important to review what types of things you share with those people versus what you might share with your family or friends that you know in person. Other concepts of like consent, what abusive behavior is, what illegal sexual behaviors are, also are usually important to have some explicit teaching of. And also just the basic consequences of sexual activity, including STDs, pregnancy, that kind of stuff. And the last area is just helping develop social skills. So those are really interpersonal skills that help a person maintain a conversation, initiate a conversation, understand nonverbal communication, and understand what was appropriate and not appropriate in a dating situation. So here is a scenario. This kind of scenario is something that I actually have quite a bit of experience with, just my work with parents and being a parent. So Lenore is a fan of manga. I don't even know what people call it. She spends a lot of time reading it online and participating in the fan website. She and her online friends often discuss their favorite characters. Lenore's parents saw that in a recent conversation, Lenore was asked to send a photo to an online friend. Lenore's parents were alarmed to find that she had shared several photos with a stranger on a website. So, this is something that is really easy to happen, especially during distance learning and everyone's home and online a lot. And, the main thing I want to share with you is just to say that things like this can happen all the time. It's very complex for some people to understand why this wasn't okay. And, in this situation, Lenore's parents talked with her special education teacher and came up with a plan with the team, including her school personnel, to kind of help her understand the differences in how you behave with strangers and especially online, so that she could protect herself from people who might want to take advantage of her. So now for just a short amount of time, I want to just talk about 3 concepts to help your tween, teen, or a young adult understand some of the hidden social rules or gray areas in these social boundaries, because it is really complex and hard to understand for some people. So one strategy that's, really powerful, I think, especially for individuals that have stronger visual skills than maybe listening or auditory processing skills, which is sometimes common in the X and Y chromosome variation population, is to use visual images to emphasize expected social behaviors. Sometimes it's easier to process that way and easier to demonstrate and remind the person about what's expected, and to help kind of differentiate between expected and unexpected. So we'll talk about some of these kind of things, but I wanted to show you, here are some basic visual supports. The one on the left, the social distancing one, is the kind of thing that is posted in all the stores right now. So you don't have to, many of us struggle with social boundaries, especially when something's new or the rules change, like wearing your mask and how far you're supposed to stand from someone. Just recently, the CDC changed some of the guidelines to 3 feet apart. What? So everything keeps changing. So we need to make a new sign. On the right is an example of just, something that you could do pretty quickly, just drawing stick figures to help someone understand personal space. The one on the right, it's not okay to touch people or to get in their personal space. The one on the left is good. You can wave and keep 3 feet distance. So, these kind of things can be helpful if you're finding yourself repetitively reminding someone something verbally. Another technique is using comic strip conversations. So basically that's just drawing stick figures with thought bubbles and speech bubbles to help an individual understand the difference between what happens internally, what we're thinking, and what we should say. So Here's an example for an individual that had very sensitive hearing. And so when someone used a loud voice, he would hit them. And so he was very interested in SpongeBob SquarePants. So this was a way to help him understand something else he could do besides hit the person when the noise was too loud. So here's SpongeBob saying, "Hi, Patrick," and then the other character saying, "Ouch, that hurts my ears," which is what we were wanting to help him learn to say. Then he's saying, "Don't talk so loud, okay?" And then SpongeBob says, "I'm sorry, Patrick." Here's another example of just something, that if you were noticing, difficulty having a conversation or giving compliments, where you can kind of draw it out and discuss it. So here's just, someone saying, "I like your shirt, thanks." Then saying, "Where did you get it?" "From somewhere." "Cool." So real simple, just teaching a discrete skill. Here's another one. It's a little harder to read, but this is, a technique, again, that you could use to debrief something that happened. So this one shows some thought bubbles and speech bubbles. So this person says, "How about this weather?" This other person says, "Oh, it's a little bit chilly." And then here's the individual thinking maybe something sexual or inappropriate, but what they're going to say would be, "Yeah, I wish it would warm up." So there's a difference sometimes between what we think and what we would say. And, we would share that this is going to help you make friends more than saying the thing that you're thinking. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I'll just show a few more things. This is another visual support, and it helps break a behavior that might be confusing or a concept that might be confusing into degrees. So this is a pretty common thing that you might see at school, but you might have not thought to try it at home. It also can help with self-regulation. So these are some examples, and in the materials, I'll be sharing some blank ones that you can just use. And this, again, capitalizes on the visual processing and can just help someone understand more nuances or gray areas. So for example, screaming is fine. Screaming's a 5, but you're just going to do that when there's an emergency, like someone's hurt or you're in danger. A 4 would be the outside voice when you're at recess, cheering at a game, calling at the dogs outside. 3 is your talking voice, 2 is a whisper, 1 is no talking. So this is something, that just kind of breaks it down. And then if the individual were, let's say, walking in the room screaming, you might point to this and point to the 3 or point to the 2, and that could be better than having to say, "Why are you screaming?" and getting into an argument. Here's an example of it being used for emotional regulation on the right, just to help the individual be more in touch with where they're at. And here is a more in-depth example of how we might use this to teach nuances in like teaching romantic topics, for example, like things you can say and not say. And this comes from a book called "The 5 is Against the Law" by Kari Dunn-Baran. And it's something that I use a bit with teenagers who are pretty verbal, but we might just do a little bit each day until we've kind of mapped out the whole 5, or a speech therapist or someone else might do that. Okay. So the last strategy I'll talk about is just using modeling and role play. So, it's one thing to understand, but most individuals also need to see someone else doing it and then have the opportunity to practice across various scenarios. That really helps kind of get the new skill automatic. And so we want to focus first on what those skills are that the individual is needing to get what they are interested in, like more friends or having someone come over to hang out. We want to be sure that we're highlighting what the appropriate relationship behaviors are, and give them a chance to practice and analyze anything that they could do better next time, or that the other person could do better next time. So there's lots of curriculums that help this. Peers is a pretty well-known and research-based one out of UCLA, and they have programs that are specific to adolescence, to tweens, to vocational skills, to dating. There's also free programs that are available. Here's an example of one just through the Center for Developmental Disabilities here in California, Regional Center of the North Bay, where they have tons of free materials for teachers and counselors and parents to access, with lots of videos and chances for role play. There's another curriculum called Circles. This is really not for parents, it's more for the professionals you're working with, but there's an app that goes with it that can be used by the individual that really helps them understand different relationships and how to differentiate between expected and unexpected behaviors. The last thing is just the idea of using narratives to help highlight social cues or what is expected, or to make the hidden curriculum more explicit. So an example of one is, explaining when you ask someone on a date and they say that they're busy, they often mean that they do not want to go out on a date with you. Not that you should pick a different time to ask them again. If someone tells you that they are busy, you should not ask them on a date again. So it's just taking an abstract concept that, the individual actually just might not know and teaching it to them really explicitly. And I often, and you probably have heard this, I use words like unexpected or expected that are just non-judgmental and help the person, kind of see, that this might have been surprising to other people, or it may have had an effect on other people that I didn't think about. And there's some tools that we can talk more about later to kind of help make that more explicit. So in closing, here's just some reminders for those of you who are caregivers and maybe stressed or concerned about difficulties with social boundaries. One, is that just to know that, first things first, we can't tackle everything at one time. This may not be the only thing that you're concerned about. And, I think it takes time to work on this. It's really good that you're thinking about it. And, really we want to start with maybe one thing first and move forward from there. Taking care of yourself and your other family members is always, when it comes down to it, really important. And this is something that I mentioned in the beginning, but I want to remind you that you are not responsible to do this alone, nor can you, and you really need a support team. So one thing that sometimes we forget to do is to just acknowledge and reinforce correct behaviors. That's something that can really help our teens both feel more positive about our relationship and also feel recognized and seen when they're putting a lot of effort into trying to do something. Because social relationships are super complex and it is hard to figure out what the right thing to do is. And then the last pointer is, regardless of social boundaries, the most important thing is your relationship with your teen and that your teen feels comfortable talking to you. So we really just want to use active listening, and validate that developing relationships is complex and it takes time and it's okay to make errors. That's how we learn new skills. Okay, and then there'll be some resources, and that is it. So we'll move now to Q&A.